The wind had a memory to it, that afternoon, the kind that smells of dry wood, iron soil, and something almost forgotten. The sky stretched wide and hot, color of hammered copper, and the earth below it cracked like an old plate passed down too long. Across that quiet, sun-wounded land stood a house not much more than a breath against the prairie, boards gray with age, corners softened by time and dust. It sat alone, stitched in nothing but miles. Alma lived there. She was the kind of woman the world had mistaken too many times. Broad-shouldered, not from nature, but from hauling water in buckets and mending fences that refused to hold. Her hair was the color of late wheat, worn always in a long braid tied with a strip of old lace. She moved without hurry, not out of laziness but reverence, as if even the dullest tasks might carry some small holiness if done with care. Alma believed in such things. Quietly, fiercely. The town some 8 miles off called her the widow who wasn't. Not out of cruelty, not exactly. But that's how they spoke, with nicknames, whispers, and sideways glances. She had never worn a ring, but long ago there had been a man, Silas Boone, with a voice smooth as velvet and a temper sharp as a broken bottle. He'd come through on his way to California gold, wooed her with poems someone else surely wrote, and made promises the desert knew better than to believe. He left one morning before sunrise, leaving only the shape of him on her bedsheets and a coffee cup still warm. She had not chased him. Alma planted vegetables instead. Come spring she coaxed tomatoes from soil too stubborn for such sweetness. In autumn she preserved every jar with her name and the date, though no one ever opened them but her. She kept her home swept, her hands busy, and her eyes soft. There was always a basin of clean water by the front step, with a ladle resting against its side. Travelers passed through from time to time, cowhands, drifters, peddlers of dust and dime novels. And if they stopped, she nodded and said nothing. The water was enough. Once, a child from the town asked her why she lived out there alone. Alma had bent down, dusting flour from her skirt, and said, "I don't mind the silence. It listens better than most folk." Still, the quiet carried weight. And sometimes at night, with only the coyotes for company, Alma would open her cedar box and read old letters never sent. One was folded more than the others, its edges soft as linen. To Silas, not out of longing, but because it reminded her she could still feel once. She never did send it. She had no desire to reopen a door she'd spent years learning to close gently. The sun began its descent, lengthening the shadows across the fields until they seemed to reach for her house like fingers. Alma stood barefoot on her porch, shelling peas into a tin bowl, each drop a soft little thud against metal. Her dog, Scout long gone to age, had once curled at her feet during such evenings. She missed his snore, missed the weight of another heartbeat nearby. Across the dirt path that led nowhere in particular, the air shimmered, the kind of shimmer that could be heat or hope. A bird wheeled overhead, circling something she couldn't see. Alma shaded her eyes. Nothing there. Then, the wind changed. It came cooler, brushing past her cheeks with a sigh that felt known. And not 5 minutes later, she saw it. The faint silhouette of a rider, small at first, then slowly unfolding like a picture from a book, real and not. She didn't flinch. She didn't hide. Alma simply went inside, fetched a clean basin she kept covered for just such days, poured in cool well water, and set it back down on the step. She wiped her hands on her apron, returned to her peas. Didn't look up again until the hooves fell silent. He didn't dismount right away. The man sat on his horse like he'd grown from the saddle itself, all bone and dust and shadow. His skin was dark, sun-worn, not with the paleness of cowboys, but the bronze stillness of canyon stone. A woven sash lay across one shoulder, and feathers hung from his braid, not for decoration, but meaning. Alma nodded once, small. He looked down at the basin, then at her. His eyes were the kind you don't often meet, not because they were hard, but because they were unafraid. She had known fear, and she knew now he didn't carry it. He slid down in one motion, graceful and quiet. The horse stood, patient, as if understanding this moment mattered. He drank, not greedily, but like someone who respected water more than most. Each dip of a ladle was deliberate. A pause. Then the next. Alma kept her eyes on the horizon. When he finished, he placed the ladle back, gently. Their eyes met just for a breath. And in that breath, something passed, not story, not language, but the kind of seeing that recognizes pain and peace and doesn't flinch from either. Then he nodded. That was all. Alma didn't ask his name. He didn't ask hers. He turned, remounted, and rode on. But when the sun had dipped low and her bowl was full, she stepped off the porch and saw something tucked beside the basin. A feather. Long, dark, tipped and red. Not dropped, not forgotten, but placed. Intentionally. A mark. A message, perhaps. Though she could not read it, she understood its weight. Alma knelt, touching it just once. Her fingers trembled in a way she hadn't known they still could. That night, the wind curled soft around the corners of the house, and the stars blinked low and heavy. She didn't light the lamp. She sat by the window and listened. Not for hoofbeats. Not for coyotes. But for something else entirely. And, in the distance, so faint she thought it might be her own breath, she heard it. A drum. One beat. Then two. Then stillness. Alma rose and poured another basin of water, just in case tomorrow asked again for kindness. The morning after the rider came and went, the land held its breath in a way Alma had not felt in years. The dew didn't cling to the grass like it usually did. Birds sang quieter. Even the fence posts seemed to stand a little straighter. She moved through her routine, feeding the hens, sweeping the porch, checking for gopher holes in the garden. But something about her motion had shifted. Not slower, not faster. Just more aware, as if the world had placed a question in her hands and was waiting to see how she might answer it. By noon the sun had risen high enough to flatten shadows. The air shimmered again near the horizon, and she caught herself watching the trail too often, wiping her palms on her apron, though they weren't dirty. She told herself she wasn't expecting anyone. She'd given water. That was all. But her mind returned to the feather, how carefully it had been placed, how deliberate its quiet offering had felt. So when the rider returned, Alma didn't pretend she was surprised. But neither did she pretend to understand why her breath caught. He came from the north this time, same horse, same stillness. She noticed the way he scanned the land first, eyes not just seeing, but reading. He dismounted slower today, like he was no longer just passing through, but stepping into something. Alma didn't speak. She didn't need to. He approached the basin again, touched the ladle with the same reverence, drank slowly. She watched the way his throat moved, the way his fingers curled around the wood, like someone who did not take life for granted. This time, when he looked at her, it lingered. There was no sharpness in his gaze, just patience, tempered like old iron. He didn't smile, but something softened around his eyes, and Alma felt it. Not attraction, not yet. Something older than that. Like when you find a familiar rhythm in a stranger song. She gestured toward the bench beneath the cottonwood tree, its bark pale and peeling in the afternoon heat. He considered it, then sat. She followed. They sat with the space of a small table between them, though there was no table, only dirt and the slow crunch of cicadas in the distance. He said his name, voice low as riverbed gravel. Toya. She repeated it back, careful with each sound. He nodded, approving. Then silence returned, not awkward, just whole. Toya pointed to the well in the distance, then to the basin. She nodded, drew from it every day, even when no one came. Especially then. He nodded again. Then he touched his chest lightly, 2 fingers, and said something in his own tongue. She didn't know the words, but she understood the tone. Respect. Gratitude. She offered bread. It was still warm from a hearth, wrapped in linen. He took it without ceremony, as if the gift were already part of the land. He ate slowly, chewing with purpose. Alma folded her hands in her lap, unsure whether to speak or simply listen to the wind between them. Her words had so often been used against her, twisted, misheard, discarded. But here, with this man who said so little, silence became a kind of trust. Finally, he spoke again. Edge of water, he said, tapping his chest once more. Toya. She blinked. That's what your name means. He gave a small nod. Alma let the meaning roll in her mind like a stone across a creeked edge of water. It sounded like a place between two things, between thirst and relief, between endings and beginnings. She liked it. She told him her name. Just Alma. No meaning in it, not one she'd ever been told. He looked at her for a long moment, then pointed at the feather now tied to her porch post. You kept it. She nodded. Didn't seem right to put it away. He smiled then, not a full smile, just the corner of his mouth giving in to something lighter. They sat a while longer. She asked no questions. Neither did he. And yet, she felt like they had said more in that shared quiet than most people ever did over supper and scripture. When the sun began its descent, he rose. She thought he might go without a word, as before, but instead he stepped toward the horse and retrieved something from the saddlebag, a small pouch tied with rawhide. He handed it to her. She opened it carefully. Inside a handful of dried leaves, sweet-smelling and brittle. She looked to him for explanation. He said one word, Sipapu. She had heard the term once from an old book years ago. A sacred place, a passage, the origin from which the people emerged. She didn't know what he meant by giving it to her, but she knew it was not a careless gesture. She folded the pouch closed with both hands, gently, as though it might hold the breath of something ancient. Toya touched his fingers to his temple, a sign of parting. Then he mounted and turned without haste, riding west. Alma stood there until the horse vanished into the dust. Her hand still held the pouch like a small heartbeat. That evening she did not read the old letters. Instead, she brewed a pot of tea and sat under the cottonwood, letting its leaves murmur above her. Her thoughts weren't loud. They didn't need to be. Something in her chest had shifted, not cracked open, just loosened, like a door left unlatched to welcome whatever wind might come. She placed the pouch on her table, beside the feather. Outside, the dusk deepened, and somewhere beyond the ridge, just before the first stars blinked awake, a coyote howled, not lonely, but calling something home. The morning came not on wings, but with the heavy tread of something waiting just beyond sight. The light was thick and reluctant, draped over the hills like a blanket not yet ready to be pulled back. Alma woke with the weight of unfinished dreaming behind her eyes and a dull ache in her hands, though she'd done nothing the day before to earn it. The air was hushed, not peaceful, stilled, the way the woods go quiet before thunder. She stepped out to the porch with her coffee and froze. Circles. Boot prints, neat and deliberate, ringed the edge of her home, not the lazy paths of someone passing by, but intentional. Wide loops around the house, pressed deep into the dust, like questions carved into skin. They hadn't been there the night before, and they didn't belong to Toya. She would have known the quiet rhythm of his step, the lighter indentation of a man who moved with the land rather than against it. These steps were heavier, bolder. Alma's first instinct was not fear. It was stillness. She stood with the coffee cooling in her hands, letting her mind move slowly. This had happened before in smaller ways. Cattle moved. A gate unlatched that she knew she'd secured. The faint scent of smoke from nowhere. This land had always lived between lines, and she'd made peace with that. But this was different. Scout, her old dog, had once barked at nothing for hours, hackles high and eyes fixed on the tree line. He'd sensed what she could not. Now there was only her, and circles. In town, there would be talk. By midday, she was there. The general store smelled of rope and molasses. Men leaned on counters that didn't belong to them, and women whispered between the fabric bolts. Alma walked in as she always did, head high, pace measured. And still, the room felt quiet in that way it did when the subject of gossip walks through the door before the stories finished being told. She asked for salt, flour, and a spool of thread. The owner's boy fetched them quickly. He liked her, thought her mysterious, maybe, or just kind. But it was old Mrs. Carrow who broke the silence. "You hear about the tracks?" she asked, voice high and taut, like a line pulled too tight between fence posts. Alma didn't answer. "Some say they've been seen out near the bluffs, watching, circling. They, them, Navajo, or Apache. or worse. Another woman clucked her tongue. It's not safe anymore, not with them moving like that. You live too far out, Alma. Always have. A man spoke next, one she hadn't seen in 2 years. Silas Boone. Leaner now. Dustier. Still carrying that empty charm like a polished revolver. All gleam, no bullet. He stepped forward like someone who had the right. I could ride you out, he offered. Voice warm at the edges, but hollow at the core. To my place. Just till things quiet down. Alma looked at him for a long moment. She saw the same man who had left without saying goodbye, standing here now pretending time could be folded like laundry and put back in its place. She did not speak cruelty. She simply said, I'm fine. He smiled too quick. Didn't figure you'd take help. She met his eyes. No. I just know the kind that doesn't mean it. Silas looked away first. She returned home under a sky thick with heat, the clouds heavy, but not bursting. The silence was louder now, no birdsong, no rustle of rabbit or snake. Just wind moving like a thought you can't shake. By late afternoon, they came. At first, only shadows on the ridge. Then horses. Dark figures against the light. Too many to count. A slow, deliberate line forming like a curtain drawn across the earth. They didn't move forward. Didn't call out. Just watched. Alma didn't run. She poured water into the basin. Laid out bread. Braided her hair. If she would meet what came, she would meet it as herself, not a shrinking thing, not a woman who begged to be spared. The first horse stepped forward, and from it dismounted Toya. He walked with the gravity of stone, each step neither rushed nor threatening. His eyes held something deeper than warning, something older than explanation. When he reached her, they stood in the slow hush of twilight, where nothing dared breathe but the grass. You were watched, he said. Alma didn't ask why. She understood what was meant. Not spied on, not hunted, witnessed. They wanted to see what you'd do, he continued. If you'd run, if you'd fear. And now, his jaw moved slightly. Now they know. Behind him, the riders began to dismount slowly, respectfully. Some stayed with the horses. Others stood, quiet, arms crossed. There were no weapons drawn, no challenge, just presence. Alma's eyes drifted over the faces, some young, some lined like bark, all silent, all steady. Their expression wasn't anger. It was calculation, perhaps, or something sacred, a measuring. She turned back to Toya. And you? His voice was low, but certain. I told him you gave water. Without question, without fear. That shouldn't be rare. But it is. He glanced to the feather tied to her post. You honored it. I felt it meant something. It did. Alma didn't know what came next. But something inside her shifted again, like the slow creak of a door that's been closed too long. Not flung open, just eased, enough to let in air. Toya stepped aside and motioned gently toward the house. May we sit, he asked. She nodded. They gathered around the porch. Some sat on the ground. Others leaned against their mounts. No one spoke for a long time. There was only the crackle of a breeze through the mesquite, the low murmur of hoof and breath, and the soft clink of the ladle resting against the basin. As night came, Alma lit a lantern. Its glow reached only a little way, but none of them seemed to mind. Light didn't matter when understanding had already taken root. A young woman in the group began to hum, just a thread of sound, wordless and gentle. Another man tapped a rhythm against his knee. No drums, no spectacle, just a heartbeat rising from dust and memory. Toya leaned against the porch post, arms folded. You could have feared us, he said quietly. I didn't. Why? She looked down at her hands. Because not every stranger is a threat. Some are just thirsty. He nodded. And for the first time since he'd appeared on her land, he sat beside her. Not across, not apart, together. When the stars began to scatter like spilled sugar across the sky, no one had left. They were not guarding. They were not threatening. They were keeping company. Alma closed her eyes just for a moment and felt it, not safety, not exactly. Something older. Something like belonging. Like having been chosen by something you never applied for. And that night, for the first time in years, she dreamed without ghosts. The fire was lit just after the stars took full hold of the sky, not a roaring thing, but a low and steady blaze, its light soft as a memory. It crackled in the center of the circle they had formed without words, without command. The warriors moved as if guided by a rhythm born from bone, not voice. They didn't look to Toya for direction. They already knew where to sit, where to stand, when to be silent. It was the kind of unity Alma had never seen, not in church pews nor town meetings, and certainly not in the arms of Silas Boone. The fire gave shape to everything. Faces, hands, glances, breath. Shadows danced up the sides of her home, not haunting, but watchful. The heat curled gently against her skin as she sat beside Toya, neither too close nor far. In this moment, they were not strangers, not even guests. They were part of the same stillness. Toya passed her a strip of smoked meat wrapped in sage, and she took it with both hands. Small gestures meant something here, more than words ever had in the life she'd known. She chewed slowly, tasting the story in every fiber. Across the fire, an elder with hair silver as river ice began to hum, the same note the young woman had sung earlier, now deeper, woven with gravel and breath. Alma couldn't understand the words that followed, but she understood the meaning. Grief, grace, return. When the song faded, a younger man, barely more than a boy, stood and approached the fire. He threw in a handful of blue cornmeal, and the flames flared, licked the sky, then settled. The scent that rose was sweet, smoky, a prayer made scent. Then came the silence, not empty, full, like lungs after a deep breath held just before release. Toya spoke not loudly, but every ear turned toward him. She lives on land once walked by our blood. Her well pulls water from earth, where our bones once rested. A murmur passed through the group, not alarm, not anger, acknowledgement. She did not guard it. She did not claim it. She gave. Toya turned his eyes to Alma. You offered water before you knew my name. I didn't need to know it, she said, voice low but steady. You were thirsty. That was enough. He nodded slowly, as if her answer confirmed something more ancient than the night itself. The elder across the flames spoke next, his voice rough, dry as the cliffs. Toya translated when he finished, the words falling like stones into a still pool. He says the land remembers, that it watches more than men do, and it trusts slow hands, not loud mouths. Alma looked down at her calloused fingers, at the crescent dirt beneath her nails from this morning's digging, at the burn on her forearm from where she'd reached too deep into the hearth. Her hands had not been made for fine things, but they were strong and steady, and known now. She felt a stirring inside her chest, not pride. Something gentler. The knowledge that her life, small and unspoken as it had been, had mattered. That her days alone, her quiet rituals, her unthanked offerings, they had not gone unseen. Toya leaned in then, voice lower. They feared you might treat us like others have been treated. She turned toward him. With suspicion? With mercy twisted into bargain. Or worse, kindness that expects a ledger. Alma looked into the fire, the truth catching like wind in her throat. I have nothing to trade. He considered her a moment. You have honesty. That is rarer than gold. A pause passed between them, soft and whole. She reached for the pouch he had given her days before and opened it now, in full view of the firelight. The sweet scent of sapapu leaves unfurled into the circle, and every head turned. Alma stood, walked carefully to the fire, and knelt. She whispered something, not a prayer, not quite, and tossed the leaves into the flames. The response was immediate and subtle. A few nodded. One woman closed her eyes. The elder's smile was barely there, but it changed the whole shape of his face. It was not just the act of burning the leaves. It was how she had done it, slowly, with both hands. The way she had let silence fill the space between motion and meaning. Toya stood beside her now. You honored it, he said, not as question, but confirmation. I didn't know what it meant, she said, but I could feel it asked for respect. He looked down at her for a long breath. Then he reached into the leather pouch at his side and drew out something wrapped in red cloth. When he opened it, the fire caught on the edges of a carved stone, shaped like a human hand. Palm open, lines etched in bone-deep grooves. He placed it in her hand. It was warm, as if it had been waiting for her. "It means open hand," he said. "It is how we show readiness. To give, to receive, to hold or to release." Alma's fingers curled around it. The circle stayed by the fire well into the night, but one by one they rose, offered silent gestures of departure, a touch to the heart, a nod to the earth, and walked into the darkness as quietly as they had arrived. By the time the flames dimmed to ash, only Alma and Toya remained. He did not speak immediately. They sat together, both watching the embers curl and sigh. "I cannot stay," he said finally. She nodded. "But I will return." That wasn't a promise. It was something truer, a decision still being made, shaped like river stone in the hands of time. "Why did you come back?" she asked him. Toya looked at her then, and for the first time, his expression broke open into something close to sorrow and joy at once. "Because you made space. Without knowing who I was, or what I might carry, you let me exist without fear." Alma felt tears rise, not from sadness, from recognition. They stood. The night was nearly gone. The first brush of dawn curled pale and uncertain along the edge of the hills. He mounted his horse without flourish. The wind caught the feathers at his braid and scattered them gently. As he turned, Alma stepped forward. "I don't expect anything. I know, but the door will remain unlatched." He gave the smallest smile. "That is more than most ever offer." He rode off into the horizon, not quickly, not slowly, just enough to leave his presence lingering behind, like smoke after cedar has burned. Alma stood alone, though she did not feel it. The fire behind her had died, but its heat remained in her bones. She held the carved hand in her palm and felt its meaning settle. She had not been rescued. She had not been chosen. She had not been changed. She had been seen. And sometimes that is the only miracle the world has left to offer. Later, as the morning broke open and the sky softened, Alma refilled the basin by her door, tying the feather tighter to the porch post so it would not drift. And to the wind, to you, to us, to whoever might be listening, her story whispers still. When you give without wanting, wait without seeking, and love without naming it love, the world remembers you. Not loudly, not all at once, but in circles drawn gently in dust, and in strangers who see the water you leave out and leave something behind in return.